Hello and welcome to another edition of Cosmic Cliff Notes. I always have to check what I called this thing because, alliterations and stuff. I'm your host, Clifton Smith, and thanks for watching. This is episode 5. And before we begin, if you could subscribe, I'd appreciate that. So I know that you're watching. It's 4:44. So one of the things that we've been discussing and exploring is really this. I don't know if you can see it. It's a crystal. And it's really the crystallization and scaffolding that is necessary for the creation of society. It's a framework to look at how the world works based off of the formation, structure, and stickiness or crystallization of how relationships form and interact and how societies operate. And we looked at things like, the Jenga towers and the lasagna, the layers of lasagna, and how sometimes if you start out with a poor foundation, you can't really just add, more layers of lasagna to make it taste better. And how a brownie, for example, once it's been put into a lot of energy applied to it, it no longer becomes gooey, malleable, it becomes solid and stiff. And how certain corporate structures are that way and society is that way. We also explored the area of, what else did we explore? Oh, right, how to create our own crystals, right? Whether we add on to the scaffolding of society and continue it, and whether or not that would work, or whether we need to build our own crystal lattice, our own societal scaffolding. And then we also talked about the incisiveness in terms of focus and attention in order to actually make a change based on whatever level and dimension that you're desiring in terms of societal change or corporate change, and how loose structures allow for a lot more malleable environments. That's why startups and tech companies are constantly adopting new technologies, and they're so malleable that their culture changes. That the first 5 hires you bring on change the culture each time you bring on a new hire, and they're the core determinants of a successful company culture or not, and how challenging it may be for a lot of these organizational change and innovative consultants to come in and change company culture in large organizations just because of the corporate scaffolding that has really been solidified. And then also how investors can leverage the malleability and the instability of organizations for gain, for really pushing a huge growth trajectory into the DNA of these organizations, making them unstable, making it more likely that founders are replaced with experienced managers, and why just the whole startup scene is not really solving for the right challenge. It's really a game for maximizing return for the venture capitalists and glorifying the entrepreneurial journey, basically over leveraging the entrepreneur and the individual trying to create a change in the world. And in my Cliff Notes, I talked about just the challenge of entrepreneurs having such limited understanding and awareness of what actually needs to be solved or what could be solved, right? By increasing their awareness and exploring areas of life and reality that exist outside of a pearly gates of an academic institution, and going into the world and seeing it, as well as doing some self-realization and self-awareness practices, so that when they even go out and they see these challenges, it doesn't just hit and bounce off of them as they go back to their old lives, but hit and really sticks. It's a deep resonance in them to want to make a solution, and also be aware enough on how to handle executing and all the complicated stakeholders that are there to make a solution that actually is viable and solves all dimensions of the challenge. And then finally talking about how, this really needs to be a grassroots effort where it's not an outsider coming in and making a change, but really growing it within the community, wherever it may be, whether it's in the backyard of Los Angeles, or in sub-Saharan Africa, or in parts of India. And really how this model can be applied to one's own journey and one's own growth, is the ultimate sort of loop back into the self realization journey, and how entrepreneurship can really be a journey of self-awareness and self-realization. And so what I wanted to talk about today is really, I didn't have anything to talk about today, so I figured I'd just talk and see what comes. I guess really what I wanted to talk about was how the new way of doing business could be applied to all aspects of life, and how things like holacracy, or innovations like holacracy. No, I don't want to talk about that. Mm. Well, there you go. I guess that's it. Just recapping what the first 4 episodes were about, and breaking through to understand that we really are in a position to create the scaffolding for every individual to go through their own directed, guided self-realization journeys, their own exploration of self-sufficiency and autonomy through the means of creation and capitalism, or free market economy, however you want to call it. And what happens is, as our I've noticed, is as our awareness grows, those egoic identities towards certain business practices, or towards even business ideas, need to be let go. Just as we unclutch and complete with, a traumatic experience that's stored in our body, we also must shed the ideas of business ventures that we held deep within us as our awareness grows, and recognize that perhaps it is a not fully matured idea that needs to be let go in order for the mature idea to reveal itself. And what I mean by that, grounding it, is some entrepreneurs have this idea, and they've like, we're going to make this happen. We're going to make this happen. Perhaps a very simple one is like a dating app, right? Because let's face it, entrepreneurs tend to be very active and desiring certain procreation activities, right? So you come up with something simple like a dating app, and you think about it, and you're like, no, I'm going to create a dating app. And you see it at the level that you're at, right? Oh, in college, right? Because, well, a lot of hormones go in there, and partying and free time. But once you graduate, for instance, your awareness of the dating environment shifts, and so too might your solution towards how to get laid, right? How to have sex or meet someone or whatever. And then you create a solution that might solve for that, like, oh, recently graduate individuals who aren't on campus anymore and are actually working jobs. And you may go a step further with perhaps a yoga retreat or self-realization thing, or a interesting experience that transcends your previous mental model. and you realize that, hey, it actually is probably better to get to know people on a deeper level, but besides just swiping right. Um, and you evolve your idea and your concept to match that need, or that desired need that you feel is out there, to be solved. And what's interesting is understanding whether or not that self-awareness of what needs to be solved is something that truly needs to be solved for the masses, or whether it's simply example, an outer manifestation of an inner trauma or inner resistance, inner blockage within oneself that needs to be resolved in order to move on. So, for example, if the desired observation always tends to be around relationships, then perhaps the individual actually has an issue connecting with individuals, or an issue with relationships, him or herself. And so you can look at the entrepreneur's desired idea as a form of an expression, an outer manifestation of what he or she currently encounters. And this, of course, is one way to get to a business idea. Another way is to do an analytical approach of doing a study of a particular industry that you might be interested in, and seeing where there might be white space. And that's a much more analytical perspective. And I bring these two up because when you go through the Foundry process that I've created, and you go through the slide deck creation, and you start to share what is that true narrative, where the original idea stems from is really what comes out once you get into that narrative stage. And it exudes the energy of the intentioned, how the idea came to you, whether it was an analytical approach. Then that pitch, it's very hard to feel a heartfelt resonance. And it tends to be very like analytical and practical, and this and that and this and that and that. Whereas if it's an outer expression of a trauma or an issue within oneself, the feeling of like extreme identity with the idea and resistance towards feedback tends to come up. Another way business ideas come out is if people aren't really into the idea, like they stumble across it, they're entrepreneurs, they want to be because it sounds cool, or maybe their friends are doing it and it's a fun exercise. This will come out in the pitch when people share the stories, that there will really be one main person leading the charge, and it's clear that it was that one person that kind of grabbed the others to do the project. Whereas the best approach is one where it is so deeply in alignment and resonance with the individual, and it's been their progressive journey, and they've been able to attract other individuals that create a beautiful complementary skill set, in order to fully create and execute on the business vision. And what I mean by that is people's narratives, it's as though this was the one idea that they were here to create. It's a constant through line in their life, and they've gone through the trials, the tribulations, and face the rejection and the resistance, and continue to push forward, rather than an individual who is using it as a solution for their own issue. That person may not have actually felt the failures as tangibly as those entrepreneurs who have pursued an idea because that's who they felt they were, failed, and then stood back up and continued to dust themselves off, get a deeper understanding of what it is that they are here to do. And it's more of a calling that is not an egotistical solution or solvent to an incompletion or a trauma within them. And you can understand that based off of people's ego, right? It's hard for them to get feedback on their idea. They don't really want to move forward on that idea. They don't want to bring in other people into the fold. That's an idea that's indicative of being attached to the idea and not actually being drawn to make it into reality. And it's more of almost an expression of a trauma versus the individual who pushes him and herself to share what they feel is out there as their lifelong calling, and takes continual feedback and continues to push through, and to receive any constructive feedback, because from that perspective, the entrepreneur knows that feedback will only make the idea better, and it's not an attack on the entrepreneur's identity. And so, to reiterate, there's different ways that we can honor the entrepreneurial journey, and the first part of that journey is the intentionality with which the entrepreneur goes on the journey to manifest, to create the idea. And it's really about understanding how that idea came to be, what were the extenuating circumstances, how resonant and passionate is that entrepreneur with that idea, and also how is that entrepreneur moving forward or not moving forward through the perceived areas of resistance and trauma to actually manifest it and make it into reality. So when you hear people talk about their narrative on the pitch deck, which is something I've been doing for many people here with the Foundry, it comes up. It can be very formulaic. It can be very passionate and heart-centered. It can be wild and all over the place. And it could also be almost restrictive and limiting. Like, I don't want to share my idea. It's too good. It's too good. Almost like an attachment. And the other side of that is taking feedback. And that stems the challenge reveals itself. You don't need an intuitive understanding in the pitch or whatnot, but in the Foundry process, it reveals itself in a few key areas. So going out and getting feedback on the functionality. Hey, do you actually like this? Does this solve your problem? Is a clear indicator whether or not you're open to receive feedback and you actually want to make an impact for others, versus is this more of a self-centered perspective and something that's tied to an identity and perhaps trauma, and as well as, is there actually momentum and energy to make this happen? Because the entrepreneurial journey is one of great times of growth, personal growth and expansion, which means you're breaking through different comfort zones. And if you can't even get through that first barrier of asking people for feedback on your idea, when you haven't even spent much time on the project, then the likelihood of success is much less. Another area that I've seen this come out is this desire to control everything in the pitch deck, a desire for secrecy. And while sure there's great opportunity for non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality things, in the modern entrepreneurial landscape, this idea of confidentiality is one that is very hard to hold unless it's truly coming out of some form of academic or research institution, because your general technology that plays upon the app market base or a new concept for cryptocurrency, um, renders confidentiality almost silly, and prohibitive, because in many cases it's not enforced, it's not enforceable, and it's just good luck enforcing it. So what happens when people want you to sign a confidentiality agreement is it's really like what is so special about it, and most likely they feel that they need to exert some form of confidentiality because they think their baby is like the best baby out there, and they don't want it to be open up for scrutiny. Um, and unless you're coming out of some sort of PhD, research lab, or you're in a highly competitive, a heavy, engineering type product that might disrupt major players, I wouldn't look at it, because it's really about execution. So, um, to summarize, really think about, as you're creating a new business idea, a new venture, a new form of reality. Where is it coming from? Where's the desire coming from? Is it coming from like this very strong soul purpose desire? Is it coming from like an analytical framework? Is it coming because it's filling a gap in your life, and it almost becomes like your dose of comfort, to work on it because it's meeting an unmet need within yourself? um, and then see as you develop your narrative, how it comes across. Is it something that is very passionate but really not grounded in any sort of logic, where people might be like, whoa, this is great, let's do it, let's create this thingamabob, and you're like, we're not creating a thingamabob, we're creating a whatchamacallit. Perhaps then what you're doing is you're actually leveraging, your excitement, and you're transmitting your excitement as as almost like a drug, an opiate, to get other people excited. And of course, you need excitement in your narrative, but some people get so overly excited and talk so much, they think that they have to cram so much information in a pitch deck, that it's just information overload, and it's just passion energy overload, where people are like, yeah, this is great, but I have no idea what it is. That's not going to move you forward. It might get a lot of interest, but it's interest for the wrong reason, and not to be able to actually support you on your journey and your venture. And then the other thing is, at what level of awareness is this idea coming from? As we started, is this some college person who really hasn't had an opportunity to explore the world? Or is this someone coming from a community, an underserved community, or a deep understanding of a certain situation that we really haven't solved the problem for? We haven't solved the challenge for. And how long has this individual been seeped in this kind of concept and idea? And has this person been faced with any setbacks that they overcame, or are they your hotshot, all-star people? And these are all important considerations, because hedge funds, some of the biggest and wealthiest traders, are those hotshots from Harvard Business School and whatnot, who don't miss, who don't fail. And it's that sense of almost hubris that gets them the big returns, but then they also are the ones who hold on to bad investments longer than everyone else, because they think they can't fail. So consider too, when you're working on an idea, what level of consciousness is this coming from, and what kind of world is it going to create, and is that really the kind of world you want to live in? And a nice test is ask your mom or dad, hey, would this kind of world be nice? Ask your friends, ask your spiritual leaders, ask yourself, is this the kind of world that you want to live in, or did I just happen to stumble upon, some business idea that isn't as purposeful as others could be for me? And so I end this part with the exploration of what kind of energy do you want to put into your crystal. So we've been talking about crystals, we've been talking about structuring, we've been talking about societal structuring, and it's really a metaphor for your world and your reality, and it can be applied to entrepreneurship, it can be applied to corporations. And when you have the ability to build crystals, to understand all faces of the crystal, the question is, what kind of crystal do you want to build? And more importantly, the crystal just holds the structure. What kind of energy do you want to put through the crystal? What kind of resonance do you want that crystal to have? And what do you want to come out the other end? What kind of world do you wish to create? And if we pause to think about it from a desired world outcome, perhaps many of the fast-growing startups of our time would not be around, or they would make different decisions. But because they were driven by greed motives, as well as all the other incredible motives, we see some of those repercussions in our society. And that's not to say that the technology isn't great and very beneficial. It just means that there was greed that went through the crystal. There was greed in the DNA of that crystal. And as I mentioned before, that greed often is infused by the investors and leveraging the greed that's in the founders. So we're creating here at the Foundry a new type of crystal, with a new DNA, one that is really profoundly conscious, self-aware, structured in a way that mitigates as best we can for greed in terms of both the upside of the founders and the investors, which has an equitable reduction of the risk, right? Because you need that kind of return if you're going to take that kind of risk. Well, what we've done is we've reduced the risk for both the investor and the entrepreneur, to make the return equal to the risk reduction, right? So reducing the risk, reducing the return. But that leaves 90% of failed startups in a much better position, because I guarantee you, getting something for your time and effort is much better than the 90% of people who get nothing for their time and effort with the failed startup rate. And finally, when we all walk around as crystals, with our crystals, with our structure of how we want our startups to be, how we want our world to be, and we're very clear on the kind of light that we're shining through the crystal, we can start to put together the prismatic view and combination of everyone's crystallized projection, and we can see what kind of world that is. And that's really what we're doing here, with the Foundry and at Eden, and what you might call the Noosphere, or the Noosphere, which is a part of our collective consciousness that is not in my pay grade to go into. But if you want to check it out, there's an incredible person, Michelle Katka, who is a PhD in quantum crystallography, who goes into this in depth, and whatnot. I simply just am able to get us to that point, and all the fun that can happen when our consciousness gets to that level, which I can experience and have experienced, but she has the science behind it to demonstrate it. I simply can get the crystal structure together and the metaphor for our society, for ourselves, and for the visions we wish to create. And what's nice is once that happens, then we can see exactly what our reality is afterwards. So with that, I thank you for joining me on this edition of Cosmic Cliff Notes. If you have any questions, please let me know. We went through some interesting unknowns in this video, so I appreciate you sticking with me or fast forwarding. If there's any more clarifying questions, please let me know. Thank you for your feedback. I got some last week, and really appreciate all those. And this is a very live synthesis of ideas, and so perhaps a reiteration of them to make it more clear is needed. And so if that is so, please let me know what areas you are wondering. And so yeah, thank you so much. This is how we get from Jenga towers baking lasagna to the quantum crystal sphere and the noosphere, our collective consciousness and the future reality we're all going to be creating together. Yay! And all right, thanks so much. Like, subscribe, comment, do what you want. Thank you so much for joining and watching. Have a great day.